In recent months, the global geopolitical scenario has shown signs of significant changes, and few movements have drawn such attention as the recent rapprochement of former U.S. President Donald Trump regarding military support to Ukraine. After a period of distance, Trump made decisions that surprised international analysts, politicians, and allies, signaling that the war in Ukraine, although still distant from the American territory, has again deserved strategic attention. Historically, Trump has always demonstrated a pragmatic and often unpredictable approach in foreign policy, alternating between conciliatory rhetoric and containment actions, especially when it comes to European conflicts that directly involve Russia from Vladimir Putin. For much of his administration, Trump publicly minimized the risks posed by Moscow, offering guarantees that limited the expansion of NATO to Eastern Europe, while pressuring Kyiv to negotiate directly with Putin. This stance, often criticized by members of Congress and European leaders, contributed to a climate of uncertainty that, according to experts, only reinforced the Russian determination to consolidate its influence on Ukraine and other countries in the region. However, the recent context has changed dramatically. Trump's decision to send Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine, although indirectly, marks a strategic turn. The adopted model provides that European allies fully reimburse the costs of weapons, transforming the sending of sophisticated equipment into a virtually neutral operation to the United States, while strengthening Ukrainian defenses against daily drone attacks and Russian missiles. This change, according to international analysts, is the result not only of tactical factors on the battlefield, but also of a growing perception of Trump that Putin does not follow predictable negotiation or confidence standards. The phrase speaks beautiful during the day, but at night it launches heavy attacks on Ukrainian cities, summarizes well the frustration expressed by the former president, who was mistaken for Moscow's diplomatic promises. The indirect support strategy chosen by Trump also responds to a delicate internal political balance. On the one hand, the former president wants to resume a firm and decisive leadership image, demonstrating that the defense of strategic allies is a priority. On the other hand, he needs to handle the expectations of his most isolation Republican base, which historically criticizes any direct U.S. military involvement in foreign conflicts. It is in this context that the solution of selling weapons to NATO allies arises, which, in turn, would pass the equipment to Ukraine. This approach allows the United States to remain active in Ukrainian defense assistance without directly exposing themselves to political and military risks, creating a kind of invisible hand that keeps the country in the strategic game, but far from the front lines of the conflict. In addition, the European position has been fundamental to enable this strategy. Germany and France have shown interest in acquiring Patriot systems directly from the U.S., committing to transferring them to Kyiv. In private and public conversations, European leaders reinforced the importance of strengthening Ukrainian defenses, not only in an immediate response to the Russian invasion, but also as a preventive measure against any future territorial expansion plan or Russian influence in the eastern region. The transatlantic coordination, therefore, is presented as a model of strategic solidarity, where equipment purchase and transfer capacity allows for fast and effective action, without overloading the U.S. government with direct military decisions, while demonstrating alignment between allies that strengthens NATO's position and sends light signs to Moscow on the limits of aggression. It is limited only to the indirect sending of weapons. Internally, the American political scenario imposes complex challenges that influence their decisions. Senate leaders, such as Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, have been pressured for the approval of large weapons packages to Kyiv, recognizing the strategic importance of supporting Ukraine and reinforcing United States' commitment to allied defense. However, Trump maintains calculated caution, avoiding openly supporting new Congress aid packages. This ambiguous stance is the result of a delicate political equation. While wanting to demonstrate strength and influence on the international scenario, it needs to deal with an internal base that values isolationism and questions any direct involvement in foreign conflicts. The balance between assertive leadership and maintenance of internal political support is, therefore, one of the main engines behind its recent strategy. Another central point is the issue of economic sanctions. A bipartisan bill proposes up to 500% rates for countries that buy Russian oil and gas, directly impacting the global economy in countries such as China, India, and even Brazil. Trump, although it has signaled interest in adopting these sanctions, remains cautious about its implementation. This hesitation reflects both concern for international economic repercussions and internal political calculation, as more severe measures could generate tensions with commercial allies and affect the perception of their leadership against Congress and the electoral base. Strategic ambiguity allows the former president to position himself as a prudent referee, keeping options open without irreversibly compromising. In the international field, the perception of Putin and Russia is also a determining factor. While European leaders see the invasion of Ukraine as part of a broader Russian plan to restore its sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, the United States, especially the Republican wing and Trump supporters, tend to see conflict as a European war, in which American direct involvement must be limited. This disagreement of perspectives creates a scenario in which the solution of sending weapons through European allies is particularly adequate, as it strengthens Ukraine without excessively compromising Washington's political position. It is a way of reconciling strategic responsibilities with political prudence, while sending clear signs to Moscow about American determination to protect allies without scaling conflict directly. But, as some analysts warned, the war is not only won with weapons. Issues such as logistics, operator training, and system integration would still need to be resolved so that the impact of the deal was actually felt on the front. This technical and operational gap could give Russia a temporary space to react before Ukraine was fully equipped with the new arsenal. However, for Trump and his political allies, the agreement represented a diplomatic and economic triumph, with the potential to redefine the role of the United States and NATO in the conflict. But, as we shall see, the consequences of this decision go far beyond the simple sale of weapons. In days that followed the announcement, diplomats around the world intensified contacts, seeking to understand how far the United States were willing to go to sustain Ukraine and press Russia. Trump's new stance has created a domino effect on multilateral negotiations. NATO countries began discussing a collective fund to accelerate purchases, while other nations, even outside the alliance, began to analyze the possibility of financing parts of the package. This movement reinforced the perception that Washington was transferring part of the strategic weight of the war to his allies while harvested economic and political gains. Trump's change of posture in relation to Ukraine was also the subject of internal debates in the United States. His critics pointed to the contradiction between the campaign speech, in which he considered help to Kyiv a waste, and the current enthusiasm for selling weapons to the country. Its supporters claim that the current strategy is smarter as it generates revenue for the U.S., maintains jobs in the military industry, and avoids the direct use of taxpayer money. Trump himself defended himself by saying that the new model is business, non-charity, and that ensures the continuity of support without depending on the goodwill of politicians in Washington. On the front, the expectation for the arrival of new equipment began to influence war strategies. Ukrainian troops were preparing to integrate the Patriot and HIMARS systems in their operations, while Russian forces tried to anticipate routes and installation positions of these weapons to neutralize them before they entered operation. The intelligence war in this context has gained even more importance, with drones and satellites intensifying the surveillance of strategic areas. Russia, in turn, intensified its diplomatic efforts to undermine international support to Ukraine. In meetings with countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, Putin argued that the sending of offensive weapons would extend conflict and threaten global stability. Still, the pressure of the possible secondary sanctions mentioned by Trump began to weigh on governments that had business relations with Moscow. Some countries have already started studies to reduce Russian imports, fearing devastating impacts on their economies if sanctions are applied. Military analysts warn that Ukraine's unrestricted access to the U.S.-conditioned U.S. arsenal can generate unprecedented climbing. The possibility of attacks on Russian territory using American manufacturing weapons raises concerns about direct retaliation against NATO countries. This fine line between support and direct involvement in the conflict is seen as the most sensitive point of the new strategy. For Ukrainian leaders, however, the message is clear. With money, they can acquire virtually any weapon available in the U.S. military catalog. This means that Ukraine may reinforce not only its defense, but also its ability to attack greater range and accuracy Russian positions. The psychological effect of this perspective is already felt in both Ukrainian troops and the population, which sees in the agreement a concrete possibility of balancing forces on the battlefield. Meanwhile, within NATO itself, the debate on the limits of this model grows. If, on the one hand, it allows Ukraine to be quickly armored, on the other, it transfers significant financial weight to European countries at a time when many of these economies face inflation and internal instability. Still, the argument that it is cheaper to finance the Ukrainian defense than facing Russia directly has gained strength. In the end, Trump's announcement not only marked a new stage in the war, but also signaled a paradigm shift in international military relations. He has transformed support for Ukraine, a gesture of political solidarity, into a high-scale commercial transaction, creating a precedent that can influence future alliances and conflicts. Among criticism and compliments, the strategy promises to keep the United States at the center of global military decisions, while Ukraine, armed to teeth and supported by a new flow of resources, prepares for one of the most decisive chapters in its recent history. What will happen after these 50 days will be decisive. If Putin gives in and accepting the ceasefire, Trump can present himself as the leader who forced peace. But if Russia ignores the ultimatum, the world may witness unprecedented hardening in sanctions and possibly a dangerous leap in military climbing. In this scenario, the next few weeks will not only be a countdown to Ukraine, but also for the entire global geopolitical balance.